What happens when the diagnosis that you carry stops being something that you have and starts becoming the thing that you are? Post traumatic stress disorder, chronic pain, anxiety, traumatic brain injury. These conditions are all real, they matter, and you deserve support and compassion in seeking treatment and in your recovery. But there's a subtle nuance here where there's kind of this line that you can cross over from the moment where you're kind of organizing your life around supporting yourself and seeking treatment to where you become and start to identify the illness itself. And that redefinition of who you are um, shrinks your ability to engage in therapy, hurts your motivation, changes your relationship uh, with healthcare and recovery, and can fade your hope towards what that recovery might look like. There's a big difference between, I think, a distinction has to be made between saying, I have PTSD and the symptoms that might come from this versus I am that disease. I am the symptoms that manifest from it. There was a paper in 2025 in Social Sciences that examined, the effects of chronic illness and identity. And what it found is that maintaining a broader sense of who you are and a self identity that is beyond just the disease itself allows you to have more hope and recovery and sense of self agency as opposed to developing a sense of learned helplessness where you feel like no matter what you do, you're not going to get past it. You can't get past it. And that idea kind of shows up repeatedly in literature. Um, Folks who kind of think that they may be fundamentally broken and they can never get past this is can be quite crippling, and in some regard might be worse than the actual disease itself. And that's not to say these symptoms aren't real. Not at all. This is very real, and this is not fake, but it is a different component to treating illness, especially chronic illness that we see a lot with veterans. In the military, you have there's a lot of great iconography depending on your branch and what job you had. You were a medic, you were an infantryman, you were a pilot, you were an NCO, whatever these different kind of identities and roles that we found ourselves in active duty or the reserve in. But then the thing happens, the injury happens, the bad deployment, friends get hurt, and now you separate from service, and now you've kind of left this support and this identity and this sense of self that you had while you were on active duty, and now you're out, and now you have to figure out who are you, but you're still kind of emotionally still very connected from the trauma and things that you experienced in the past. And that might be from your head injury, the combat exposures, the pain and things like this that you suffered. And it kind of narrows your focus and kind of where you are. So, what I don't want to see is folks who say, I used to really enjoy, hiking or, whatever it was, or sport surfing or whatnot. And then they go, now, my anxiety just won't let me do it. And now you're kind of in you create a self-fulfilling prophecy to some degree where you can't get treatment or you won't get treatment because it hasn't worked in the past. Or that in this context, that who you are is defined by the symptoms of the disease or the disease itself. And so there's an element, even kind of paradoxically, that might um, slow you down from even wanting to get help, and not maliciously or uh, for some type of negative reason, but you can assimilate to this kind of new lifestyle. And there's been some terms for this. You can see it as called, if you Google like learned helplessness, and illness identity integration, and there's some other concepts there, but again, can be kind of very psychologically threatening, and it's going to be important to build bridges out of this so that you can find other senses of identity in who you are. And that process can get harder because I think, anecdotally, certainly in, society, contemporary society right now with social media and all these things that, there's kind of an intrinsic reward to the suffering that you have around, for lack of a better word, like the victimhood or some things that you've had to experience. And those labels can carry some weight, and that can be a tough place to kind of break out of, especially if you're now, like I said before, you're kind of developing some sense of self around it. And I'd like to just kind of point out a couple examples here. So one is, you have two veterans, with a similar background and experiences, and one person can say like, hey, I have PTSD, right? And it affects me, and it makes, certain aspects of my life harder. And the other one who attributes everything that's going wrong in their life, to the symptoms of their disease. And those create a couple different trajectories. In the first course, you have someone who still is open to the possibility of, pursuing treatment. They're going to try and exercise and ideally are trying to reconnect socially and develop new skills. And then in the second example, you've got folks who might start to reorganize their life around their illness and how they're sick. And that kind of creates a maladaptive strategy that it's not intentional. It's not done maliciously. And it's certainly not limited to just, PTSD. I mean, you see this, I see this clinically with people suffering with chronic pain, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disease, any number of things. And those people who can develop senses of self and identity outside of the disease process that they have, I think have a higher level of functioning, and is one reason why when I think if you talk to like pain experts or physiatrists or physical medicine guys, things like this, that, the rehabilitation process and what that looks like at the end and being able to function in your daily life is probably a bigger component than just the diagnosis itself. And none of this is saying that the diagnosis isn't real. The goal is to try and, I just want to shed awareness that there is another component here that can kind of insidiously trickle into your psyche and your decision making in your world. And I want to encourage you to not surrender to that illness and that frustration that happens around it. I want to be fair and say that, to recognize that it does affect you, and these traumas have happened to you, and some days are going to be harder than others. Not every day is going to be great. But the danger is to start to say things like that things are just never going to get better. There's a sense of hopelessness. Nothing's going to change. There's no point in trying. And this is kind of this is where that line, I think, is created there. And, in the first example, there's an opportunity for adaptation and hope and progress. And in the second one is just the opposite of that. And in that example, you may feel powerless, and that is a dangerous place to be. And I don't want any of you to have to feel that you're in that camp. And what recovery looks like is going to be different for everyone. As I said in some previous video, it's not bringing you back to where you were before the trauma. It's not perfection. It is giving you agency and control over your life and helping to minimize the effects of what you're experiencing. And hopefully this allows you to participate in different programs, whether it's therapy, some type of activity, an exercise regimen, reconnecting with people, your family, friends, improving your sleep, hopefully reducing maybe some of those things in your life that might be helping to further kind of exacerbate some of these symptoms that you're having. And I think this is probably more globally ties into a bigger question about veterans, is that, who are you after service? I think your rank and the units you were in and the job you did and all these things kind of can kind of create, who you were in that sense of purpose and going on the deployments and this sort of thing. But where are you afterwards? You're not a disability rating. You're not your injury. And you're not trying to say that those things haven't happened to you. But you should be pursuing your kind of healing course in a program and not denying the reality of the suffering that you had. I don't think I articulated that very well. But I want to encourage you to continue to pursue your treatment and not get discouraged. And if this is something that you have been struggling with, I want to encourage you to reach out to your team and seek help. Or if you haven't been connected with a team, to please reach out to your VA or your primary care, whoever that is, to help you get connected. I hope this might resonate with some of you. And again, this is not victim blaming here. There is a very fine distinction between what you are suffering and the compassion and care that needs to go along with that. But also just a word of warning that sometimes these things can become a little more sinister and lead to kind of worse outcomes. And I don't want to see any of you guys in that spot. Anyway, as I said, healing is not, we're not pretending the damage never happened. I just wanted you to refuse letting that damage and trauma that you had becoming the only thing that's left of who you are. And be well.